Chapter 14. Mission 22, We'd be happy with any data at all, really, Part 5 of 6. With the bags secured to her belt, Cherry, still on her hind hooves, paused a moment to look back the way she'd come. A tiny fleck of metal in the distance was bracketed on the inside of her helmet, along with a second bracket for the flag she'd planted on site. Beneath both brackets read the distance, 1.2 kilometers. The ship was almost on the horizon, and yet it stood not quite a mile away. Hey! That's kinda strange, Cherry thought, and filed the thought for later. She wasn't sleepy at the moment, but she expected she'd be out like a light once she got on the flight couch for her sleep period. It had been a very long day, and she still had one bit of fancy flying to do. She activated the suit thruster pack, sent herself up into the airless air, and fired hard for the ship. This time, with the confidence of experience and the urgency of an experienced pilot well into sleep deficit, she allowed her speed to get up to 25 meters per second. To compensate, she drifted higher into the air, 421. To give herself plenty of room to fall when she slammed on the brakes. In a little more than a minute she did just that, having covered the return trip in less than a third the time she'd taken on her more cautious outbound hop. There was the ship ahead of her and below her, and there came the forward thrusters, pushing her back like an insistent bouncer at a Manhattan dance club. Slowed, she puffed herself back up to altitude, let herself drift closer to the ship, and then braked again. She drifted again, giving the down thrusters occasional bursts to take herself a little higher, as she drifted just past the ship. Then she tweaked the controls to face backwards, and the automatic stability system took control of the thrusters to turn her whole suit around, letting her begin to drop in the process. It took a good 3 seconds before the system shut down and restored manual control, but that was fine by her. She still had plenty of space between her and the surface below. The surface she didn't intend to touch again. There in front of her, and below, was the hatch, with its ladder made of giant staples sticking out below it. She let herself drop, tapping the control sticks to nudge the thrusters forward, then left, then a touch to the right, all the while letting herself drop at a very slow, careful, and semi-steady rate. 22, comms check, Chrysalis's voice echoed in her headset. Stand by, she replied automatically. She couldn't spare the attention now. What she was trying was tricky enough in orbit. In a hover above the surface, with the target totally stationary, there was even less margin for error. Right, down, level off, left, back off, too much back off, forward again, a little right, level off, easy, easy. The rungs came within reach. Cherry stretched a hind hoof forward first, then grabbed with both forehooves as her hind hoof found purchase on the ladder. The thruster pack controls slid back and up into the suit backpack, and the thrusters shut down, and Cherry felt the meager weight provided by minmus gravity on her limbs as she hung just below the ship's hatch, a good 5 pony lengths above the surface. She could have just jumped up from the surface. The ship had been designed with that expectation, but she had more fun this way. But fun time was over. Time to go inside, stow the samples, repressurize the capsule, shuck her suit, and get some sleep before she headed for home. After all, it had been a very, very long mission. Day 7. Footnotes 418. Without breaking herself. 419. And a good thing too, or else the phrase scenery that takes your breath away would have had a much more grim implication. 420. And some very special and cleverly designed bags, designed by Twilight Sparkle specifically for the purpose. 421. Not at all difficult. The suit thrusters didn't throttle, they were either on or off. That made actual hovering or proper level altitude impossible, thus the occasional burst of thrust instead of steady firing. As Cherry discovered in her first surface test, the instinct to fire those thrusters the instant she started falling meant that she spent more time going up than coming down. Thus, the longer she flew, the higher she got, bit by bit, until she noticed the trend and forced herself to lose a little bit of altitude to compensate. End footnotes. Okay, Chrysalis said, cuddling her third coffee cup of the morning close to her body as she leaned over the Capcom station in the pre-dawn hour at Or-Eden. 422. 22, ready for final pre-launch checklist. Roger, Or-Eden, Cherry's voice replied. She'd got 7 hours of sleep in and then had lectured the graveyard shift of controllers about the desirability of launching while the ship was still in sunlight. The main control team had been awakened, 423, and gradually, groggily, procedures were getting run through. It was almost enough to make Twilight Sparkle's maniacal obsession with checklists seem worthwhile. Engine status. Fuel pumps show ready, throttle at 0, fuel at 78% in return stage. Battery status. Full charge. Landing stage decouplers. Readouts show ready, Pyros armed. Atmosphere. 13.9 and steady. No leaks. Flight suit. On, sealed, activated, no leaks. Straps. Secure. Controls. Target computer aiming 60/90. SAS active. Samples and science data. All samples and other impedimenta secured. Reaction wheels. Responsive. Engine gimbal. Green light on gimbal test. Anipony need to go potty. A long moment of silence, followed by Cherry Berry's annoyed voice. That wasn't funny. That's what you think, Chrysalis gloated, 424. Stand by, 22. She looked up at the flight controller's station, waiting for the final go-no-go call. Occupant, lying limply over the podium, snored into the microphone. Chrysalis carefully muted her own microphone, then bellowed, "Occupant, wake up you idiot!" Wah! Occupant leaned up, blinking, head turning this way and that. She never got past me. Eyes weren't closed for a second. Are we go for launch, you imbecile? Oh. 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 Are we doing that? Oh. Occupant calmed down, rubbing more sleep out of his eyes, then looked around. Guys, do we need to go down the list, or can we just say okay? There was a quiet chorus along the lines of no problem, we're go. Good. My queen, tell Miss Berry she's go for launch. Please. Thank why, don't put your head back down. Chrysalis barked as Occupant was on the point of going back to sleep. Shaking her head at the injustice of the world, 425, she unmuted her microphone. 22, you are go for orbit between 10 km and 50 km. We'll have instructions for your trans-equus insertion burn once you secure from orbit. Launch in your own time, and safe flying. 22 copies, Or-Eden. Stand by. For several seconds, the ship projected on mission control's wall did nothing. Then, with a suddenness that surprised Chrysalis, it leaped off the ground on a single, tiny, almost invisible flame. Jettisoning landing stage. The two outboard engines, fuel tanks empty, science equipment used and now useless, and landing legs no longer necessary, popped off the central engine and fell away from the accelerating ship. 50 meters per second and throttling up, Cherry reported. Tilting down to 60/90. Much lighter, clear of the surface, and pointed downrange, the stub left of Mission 22 really began to pick up speed, the surface of Minmus spinning away in the projection to be replaced by the blackness of space. Flight, trajectory. Occupant yawned. Go, trajectory, he mumbled, reaching for his own cup of coffee. Flight, we're working on a trajectory to get Cherry back as soon as possible, George Bull said. The lowest delta V return would take 22 about 9 days to return. If 22's fuel is sufficient. Shut down. Cherry reported. Apoapsis at 17,000 meters. Will complete orbital insertion in 8 minutes, Mark. Roger, 22, Chrysalis said. If 22's fuel is sufficient, George Bull resumed, we want to put her on as close to a direct abort trajectory as possible. We figure we can speed up her return trip by 2 days. Wait a minute, Chrysalis said. Why does it take so long for her to come back? Because we burned a lot of unnecessary delta V to get her to Minmus quicker, Bull replied. And we had to shed a lot of it to get into Minmus orbit. If we'd got a better alignment on Minmus's orbital plane, we could have saved fuel at the cost of a longer trip. But since we still have bonus fuel, after a fashion, we want to repeat it on the way back. While leaving a small reserve for course corrections on the way back, von Braun said. We want to be very careful how she re-enters the atmosphere. Explain, Chrysalis said, finishing her cup of coffee and then, after a moment, deciding not to throw the empty at occupant's nodding head. With the direct abort, von Braun said, the Mission 22 capsule will hit Equus's atmosphere going even faster than Mission R4. There's a very real danger that too steep an angle will cause it to burn up or even crash before it reaches the ground. And too shallow an angle would cause it to just skip off and away on a new trajectory. He swooped one massive hand across his body to demonstrate. We want an altitude that is less deep than prior re-entries, but still deep enough to slow the ship enough to ensure a splashdown. I think I got it, occupant said, yawning. How high? We aren't sure, von Braun admitted. Even with Lord Cowley's best equations, our computers still don't have a grasp on atmospheric effects on our ships and their trajectories. To be safe, we're going to aim for 10 kilometers higher than Mission R4's orbital return. That high? Chrysalis asked. It's still too deep in atmosphere for anything to remain in orbit, von Braun said. We're betting it'll be enough, Bull added. It's certainly a steep enough angle to avoid a skip-off. Worst case, it takes a second orbit to complete aerobraking sufficient to land. It still seems a lot high to me, occupant said, yawning. After all, R4 nearly didn't come down. But you're the scientists. You know better than I do. If that's what you want, that's what we'll go with. Let's get to work on the problem so we can send Miss Berry the procedure as quick as possible. And somebody get us more coffee, Chrysalis added. Outside the building, Celestia's sun chose that moment to leap above the horizon. Footnotes 422. If a Ling had told Chrysalis 2 years prior that she would not only learn to like coffee but come to regard it as an indispensable requirement for sustained life, she would have ordered that Ling pod for the good of the hive. But that had been before the space race. 423. In Chrysalis's case, with great but insufficient caution. The second messenger who came to wake her had the intelligence to bring fresh coffee with him. The first messenger was paying the price for his lack of wisdom by spending some time in that pod Chrysalis kept in the throne room closet. 424. She wouldn't be gloating in about half an hour, when coffee cup number 3 caught up with numbers 1 and 2 and issued their joint demand for immediate egress. 425. 2 specific injustices at the moment, first, that she was saddled with subordinates like occupant, and second, that occupant represented someone in the top quarter of her hive if ranked by intelligence. It just was not fair. End footnotes. 7 days passed, in various ways. For example, I just want to make the point, this is mission day 12, this is my 35th consecutive cherry-based meal in flight, and for every pony at home who keeps asking, still not sick of cherries. I am, however, very glad I dumped all the stored, potty, on the second landing site on Minmus. In fact, I might just take a spacewalk later and dump what's built up since then out into space. It'll burn up on reentry, nice and hygienic. The next day's headline worldwide, horse apples. Space pony bombards Equus with poop. Another example. I played along as long as I could stand it, 22, and I have had enough. I cannot stand to read or listen to one more word of the alleged literature you selected for this trip. Today's audiobook will be Saddle for Less by Daring Décolletage. By who, or Eden? You heard me, 22. I hope you cleared the press gallery, that's all I'll say about this. Good. Chapter 1. Goldenheart adjusted the neckline of her dress, flashing her chest at the stallions who walked by. The ruffles of her petticoats swished as she walked, giving bystanders the impression that a flash of her cutie mark, or something even more shocking, might happen at any moment. Some days she felt ashamed at how low she had sunk, but on other days, days like today, she felt like any corner the next corner might hold the stallion who would carry her away from Philadelphia and all its broken dreams. The cattle car fillies wouldn't end up like that, is all I'm saying. How many all I'm sayings do you have to say, 22? How many pages in that décolletage rag? Grr. But the next corner held nothing but a lamppost, currently unoccupied. So she stopped there, leaning against it and putting a hoof on her hip, advertising to the world that, though the city of sisterly love might not have any true love left, it had something you could pretend was love, and you could rent it by the hour. You really read this? I mean, for fun. If you want cute puppy dogs and precocious children, next time take your library with you in the ship. And also, I've been thinking, or Eden, Cherry Berry said. About getting back in the ship, I hope. Chrysalis replied through the headset. Cherry Berry gave the suit thruster controls a little nudge, turning to face the moon, a distant half-lit shape in the solid black of space. About the first landing back on Minmus, she said. Also about Dragonfly's experience on Mission 21. What about them, 22? Well, Cherry drawled, giving her controls another nudge. 426, imagine if we had little thrusters like on this suit, but on the ship. It would make it a lot easier to get a precise rendezvous with another ship. It would have been a lot more certain than using the reaction wheels to get off the ground. And they'd be less dangerous than using the main engine for every single maneuver. The bird and the bulls have already been working on that, Chrysalis said. Like I told you 2 days ago. Oh. Cherry sighed. Sorry. I forgot. I just get so bored waiting to do something, you know. You only remind us 5 or 6 times a day, Chrysalis said. The good news is, tomorrow is Reentry. You definitely won't be bored then. Guess not, Cherry replied. By the way, 22, Chrysalis added, we just had a reporter here ask if your boredom includes cherries yet. 14 days of cherries, after all. That question again. I've spent over 20 years eating cherries at every meal I could get them, Cherry replied. Tell the reporter if she's waiting for me to get tired of nature's perfect food, she's got a very long wait. In these ways and others the days passed, and then came mission day 15, and reentry. The last trickle of fuel was burned in a final braking thrust, and then the final engine was decoupled, plunging by itself into the soup at a speed just barely short of Equus escape velocity. The capsule, with the service compartments that held the backup probe pilot and those experiments that couldn't be stored in the capsule, followed after, quickly compressing the air before it into a gigantic shockwave of plasma. Cherry, secure in her spacesuit and strapped tightly to the flight couch, watched the glow through the windows, grit her teeth at every shudder and rattle of the ship as it plowed through the highest layers of the atmosphere. The ship wasn't going in very deep, but its path took it through the soup for almost a perfect half-circuit of the world before shooting back out into space. If the bull's calculations were correct, this would be enough to slow the ship down so that it would remain in atmosphere, complete the circuit, and come down almost on top of Eden Space Center, where a specially trained nighttime recovery crew waited. That was the story the bulls, through Chrysalis, told her, but as Cherry watched the velocity and altitude readouts on her controls, the instruments told her an entirely different one. As periapsis approached, the orbital velocity readout showed her speed far in excess of low orbit velocity and still going up. 427. Her projected periapsis should have dropped deeper into the atmosphere as she slowed down, but it had barely budged. Her apoapsis continued to drop like a brick. The air had some effect, but as she looked, it still seemed closer to the 1 million kilometer mark of Minmus's orbit than to, well, 0. And the most telling thing, at least to Cherry's mind, laid in the altimeter's rate of climb readout. It showed her descending at less than 10 meters per second. I'm not getting much deeper, she thought. And that means I'm not getting much slower, much faster. But remember, mission R4 hit periapsis, started going back up, and stayed in atmosphere. Yet. And I'm going a lot faster than R4, and my periapsis is a lot higher. Cherry took another look at the instruments, orbital velocity still creeping up, rate of descent down to about 5 meters per second, ablator level estimated at above 90%. This bird, Cherry thought, is not coming down. And almost as she thought it, the rate of climb gauge slipped past the 0 mark and back into positive territory. Periapsis, she called out automatically. Confirm periapsis, Chrysalis's voice echoed. Now her orbital speed did begin dropping on the gauge, and at a reasonable fast clip at least, if the number being whittled down hadn't been so enormous. She brought up the trajectory computer and watched for a few moments as the projected apoapsis dropped below 600,000 kilometers. At this point, Cherry thought, R4's projected apoapsis was less than half that. Or even, 22, she said aloud. Go, 22, Chrysalis replied. I think it's pretty obvious I'm going around for a second pass whether I like it or not, Cherry continued. What I'd like to know now is, why didn't this work first try, and what can we do to get it right on the second try? The pause that followed went past significant, blew through awkward junction at speed, and went straight to Obuck land. 22, we're going to have to get back to you on that, Chrysalis said when she finally spoke. In the meantime, the bullpen suggests that, once the plasma ball dissipates, you maneuver to turn the ship sideways to increase your air resistance while you're still in the upper atmosphere. The shaking and rattling of her capsule had already diminished quite a bit, and the plasma flames on the other side of the hatch window didn't seem quite so bright. Copy, or Eden, Cherry said. But I do expect a full explanation once I'm out of the soup. Roger, 22, Chrysalis replied. In the meantime, for today's book reading, how do you feel about The Hamster and the Helicopter? Cherry blinked. That was her very favorite book by Cleverly Clearly, and she had to bite her lip to stop herself from saying so on a live mic. 428. Instead she said, run out of sock and saddle stories down there. Chrysalis drawled, putting on her most unconcerned voice. 429, you read one bodice ripper, you've read them all. They're all basically the same book anyway. Cherry filed a half-dozen comebacks and settled for, if you say so, or Eden. After a bit of silence, during which the ship continued to climb and the plasma continued to fade, Chrysalis asked, by the way, 22, have you decided what you're going to have for breakfast? Not really, Cherry said. I don't have much of an appetite. Footnotes. 426. Just because. Cherry's spacewalks had become a daily thing on the long descent to Equus, partly because she never got tired of the immediacy of flight, and partly because she was entirely tired of being in that tiny stinky capsule. She'd just tootle around within a kilometer or so of the ship until her thruster charge began getting low or Chrysalis began reminding her of the hazards of micrometeors, whichever came first. 427. An orbiting body's velocity varies from point to point in its orbit. A ship at apoapsis is traveling slower than at periapsis. As a ship rises from periapsis, gravity slows it down. As it drops from apoapsis, gravity speeds it up. This effect continues even if the periapsis is in atmosphere, with deceleration from air resistance subtracted from acceleration from gravity. In Cherry's case, this subtraction problem ended with a positive number, meaning she wasn't slowing down. 428. A gesture which, thanks to reporters and the telepresence screen, was relayed all over the world. But since the reporters all thought it was due to a tricky moment of suborbital piloting, nobody paid it any attention except Chrysalis, who regarded it as a sight she'd longed to see for many moons, just not right this moment. 429. Which unsettled Cherry a little more, because she knew after a year and a half that if Chrysalis sounded unconcerned but wasn't actively gloating, the Changeling Queen was seriously worried. End footnotes. 29 hours later, Mission 22 soared back out of Equus's atmosphere into space, its projected apoapsis only a little lower than that of the previous day. Okay, solar cells pointed back into the sun, Cherry reported, having had her ship sideways as long as she dared on the outbound leg of the aerobraking pass. And now I'm gonna insist on some straight answers, guys. How many passes is it gonna take for me to actually come down? Pause. The bulls say 7, maybe 8 passes, Chrysalis replied at length. 5 days. Remind them I have 4, repeat, 4 days of food left on board, Cherry said. Also, the computer estimates my heat shield is just under 70% ablator remaining. Does that match up with what you show? That's affirmative, 22. I thought so. That means I used up a bit more ablator this pass. I'll probably use even more every pass that comes. That means I'll be down to bare metal long before 7 or 8 passes from now. What do the burst of honest rage and frustration rattled Cherry's headset. Then, after a couple of loud breaths over the audio channel, Chrysalis began again, all professional once more. We've been working the problem on this end, 22, and we don't see any better option short of sending a rescue mission. And the problem with a rescue mission is that getting a rendezvous with you with your periapsis in atmosphere puts the rescue ship at risk. It'd be razor tight. Or Eden, you've got a room full of geniuses down there, Cherry said, allowing herself to sound about 1/10 as tart as she felt. Are you honestly saying you can't think of any way to get me down faster? 22, you have no fuel and no engines remaining, Chrysalis replied. If you know a way to maneuver the ship without engines, kindly enlighten us. I've got my suit thrusters, Cherry said. Does your suit have a heat shield or a parachute? Chrysalis asked. Without both of those you're not coming home, 22. That's what the ship is for. So since you can't exactly push it home, your suit thrusters aren't much good right now. Why not? Cherry asked. BWA 22, last message not understood, Chrysalis said, from the sound of things working hard to stifle another outburst of rage. Please elaborate. My suit thrusters recharge, Cherry said. And the ship has a backup probe core to hold it steady when I'm outside. And my apoapsis is still pretty high, which means even if I only get a few meters of delta V, that'll have a huge difference on my periapsis. A minute before she hadn't seriously thought it possible, but as she spoke every detail of the plan fell into place like it was the most obvious thing in the world. 430. So all I have to do is point the nose of the ship in the direction I want to thrust, get out, maneuver around to the heat shield, and push on the middle of it until you say to stop. 22, that's totally, stand by, 22. The channel went dead for almost a minute, during which Cherry considered which of her dwindling number of meals she should open next. If I had any sense, she thought, I'd skip another meal and save it while I waited for a rescue mission. But I'm not in the same situation as Gordo, Fauntleroy, or Fireball. I have no engines, but other than that my ship's fully operational. And eventually I would come down, on my current orbit. I'd probably even live to see that. The problem is that I likely wouldn't live to see the actual landing. And as long as I can come down under my own power, that's what I'm going to do. 22, Chrysalis said at length, the bulls calculate that using 80% of your pack's thruster power on your next apoapsis, and another 40% on the one following, will be enough to get your periapsis high enough for you to await rescue. No, or Eden, Cherry put in before Chrysalis could go any farther. Tell them to calculate the other way. I still have a parachute and a functional heat shield. A rescue would be a waste of resources. Several heavy breaths in her earphones told her Chrysalis was now holding on to her temper by the tips of her fangs. 22, she said at last, while that may be true, the bulls tell me that doing that will pretty much make it impossible for you to achieve orbit again after your next pass. If it doesn't work. I trust this ship, Cherry said bluntly. It got me to Minmus, off Minmus after falling over, and this far home. It's survived 2 passes through the soup with no difficulty. And I'm bringing her down. This pass, or Eden. Pause. Then, of all things, a soft chuckle. We read you, 22, Chrysalis said. We'll give you the word half an hour before your apoapsis. That's about 9.5 hours from now, by the way. I'll be counting the seconds, or Eden, Cherry said. Footnote 430. Or, in this case, off of it. End footnote. End of part 5.